My sister-in-law abandoned her daughter to pursue her dream of being an influencer. Now she wants me to give her back the child. But the documents I showed her left her speechless. It was a typical autumn day. I was finishing folding the laundry while my 2-year-old son played with blocks on the living room floor. My husband was at work. And when I heard the doorbell ring, I thought it was a delivery or a neighbor who needed something. I had no idea that moment would mark the beginning of one of the most chaotic situations of my life. When I opened the door, there she was, with the baby wrapped in a pink blanket and a look of desperation on her face. Without even asking permission, she entered the house talking non-stop as if she were justifying something. It was so much information thrown at me at once that it took me several minutes to understand what was happening. She told me that she couldn't take care of her daughter anymore. According to her, she had bigger plans for her life and being a mother was a responsibility she couldn't assume. Now, she just needed help for a few weeks. She insisted as she walked back and forth across the living room. I'm going to Los Angeles. I already got some contacts to start my career as an influencer. I need some time to organize myself. Then, I'll come back for her. I promise. I was speechless. My sister-in-law, who was 22 at the time, had always been unpredictable. But this seemed extreme even for her standards. I knew she was living with my mother-in-law, but apparently things weren't going well there. According to my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law had gone crazy when she announced her plans to leave everything to move to the other side of the country. And now she was here trying to pass the responsibility onto my husband and me. You already have experience with children, she said, looking at my son who was still playing on the floor, oblivious to what was happening. I know you can do this for me, just until I stabilize. At that moment, I felt a mixture of rage, disbelief, and compassion. How could she simply abandon her own daughter like that? At the same time, I looked at that tiny baby who was not to blame for anything. And I knew that I couldn't just close the door on her. I called my husband, who was as shocked as I was. But we eventually agreed to take care of the baby temporarily until my sister-in-law resolved the situation. At first, I thought that maybe she really was going through a difficult time. Who hasn't had moments of confusion in their life? But weeks passed, then months, and she didn't return. We tried to contact her with calls, text messages. We even sent emails that were never answered. Her number seemed disconnected. After a while, we realized that she had blocked us on all her social media accounts. My mother-in-law, who was initially angry with her for her decisions, started acting strangely every time we asked her about my sister-in-law's whereabouts. She needs time to find herself, she would say, as if that were a valid excuse to abandon a baby. Meanwhile, we were at home adapting to a completely new dynamic. Having Emma, as we will call the baby to protect her privacy, with us was a challenge. My son, who was still learning to speak and needed constant attention, suddenly had to share his parents with a newborn. The nights were long, filled with crying and dirty diapers. During the first months, I felt overwhelmed. But I also began to develop a deep affection for Emma. I couldn't help but see her as my own daughter, although I knew that officially she wasn't. One day, after several months of silence, my mother-in-law showed up unexpectedly at our house. I thought that maybe she was bringing news from Ada, but instead, she came with a package of diapers and a confession that left me in shock. I think you should get used to having her, she said while avoiding my eyes. What do you mean by that? I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. Your sister-in-law is not coming back, she finally replied. She is busy building her life. She thinks this is the best place for Emma. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband arrived home minutes later, and when I told him what his mother had said, he became furious. How can she do something like that? She's her daughter. What kind of person just abandons their baby and leaves? Our relationship with my mother-in-law deteriorated quickly after that. We felt betrayed not only by my sister-in-law but also by her. How could she support something so irresponsible? Apparently, My mother-in-law was more concerned with protecting her daughter's freedom than with the well-being of her granddaughter. Over time, we began to accept that Emma was our responsibility. My husband and I talked extensively about our future as a family, and we decided that if my sister-in-law wasn't going to return, we needed to take legal measures to protect Emma. We consulted with a lawyer, and he explained that the adoption process would be complicated but not impossible since there was clear evidence of abandonment. More than 18 months passed between legal meetings, document collection, and sworn statements. It was an exhausting process, both emotionally and financially. During that time, Emma took her first steps, said her first words, and my husband and I couldn't imagine our lives without her. She was our daughter in everything but on paper, and we were determined to change that. Finally, after countless nights of stress and legal discussions, we managed to officially adopt Emma. It was an emotional day when the judge handed us the final documents. I couldn't help but cry. We had fought so hard for her, and now she was officially part of our family. We thought that would be the end of our complicated story with my sister-in-law, but we were very wrong. Years passed without us knowing anything about her until one day she reappeared with a new boyfriend and demands that left us speechless. The day my sister-in-law reappeared in our lives was like a storm that arrives without warning. It was a quiet Sunday. My husband and I were preparing a late breakfast while the children played in the yard. Emma, who was now 5 years old, was running after her older brother, laughing loudly. It was such a life-affirming sound that made all the sacrifices we had made for her worthwhile. Then, we heard the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, I came face to face with my sister-in-law. She was not alone. Beside her was a tall, well-dressed man who was clearly trying to make a good impression, although his expression seemed more uncomfortable than confident. "Can we talk?" she said as if the last 5 years hadn't happened. At first, I didn't know what to say. Seeing her there after so much time left me completely disoriented. What was she doing there? Why was she back now? My husband, hearing voices, approached and was as surprised as I was. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I invited her in more out of courtesy than anything else. They sat on the sofa, and my sister-in-law started talking as if we were catching up after a long trip. She told us that she had been living in Los Angeles all this time, working on creative projects and building her personal brand. She had accumulated a decent number of followers on social media, and according to her, she was now in a place where she could rebuild her life. All of this sounded irrelevant until she dropped the real reason for her visit. "I think it's time for Emma to come back with me," she said with a smile that was intended to be warm but only managed to infuriate. "Excuse me?" My husband was the first to react. "Yes," she continued, completely ignoring his tone. "I already have everything planned. I have a suitable apartment, a fiancé who is excited to be part of Emma's life, and we are ready to start a family together. I know I have made mistakes in the past, but I think I am now prepared to be the mother she deserves." I felt like my blood was boiling. I had spent 5 years raising Emma, watching her grow, taking her to the doctor, helping her with her first words, hugging her when she had nightmares. And now this woman, who had not shown even a glimmer of interest in her daughter during all this time, appeared out of nowhere as if she could pick her up as if she were a package she had left at the post office. My husband, normally calmer than me, was forceful. "You can't just come here and claim Emma as if nothing happened. Legally, Emma is our daughter." That seemed to surprise her. "What do you mean by legally?" Then, with a calmness that surprised even myself, I got up, went to the room where we kept our important documents, and returned with a folder. I opened it in front of her and showed her the adoption papers. "Emma is not your daughter. Not legally," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "We had to go through a long and difficult process because you abandoned her. These are the documents that prove it. Your parental rights were terminated years ago." The expression on her face changed immediately. The fake smile disappeared. And in its place appeared a mixture of disbelief and fury. That's not fair. I never said I wanted my rights taken away. You abandoned Emma, my husband said in a firm tone. Not only legally but in every way. You never called. You never asked about her. You never sent a single dollar to help take care of her. What did you expect us to do? Leave her on the doorstep waiting for you to come back someday? The man who had come with her tried to intervene. Maybe we can discuss this more calmly. After all, everyone wants the best for the girl. But my husband was not willing to yield. The best for Emma is to stay with the people who have raised her, who have loved her unconditionally, and who have been there for her every day of her life. If you really cared, you wouldn't have disappeared. The discussion continued for several minutes, with my sister-in-law alternating between yelling and begging. Finally, when she realized that we were not going to give in, she got up abruptly. This is not over, she said, pointing at both of us. I am going to fight for my daughter. After she left, I sat on the sofa, emotionally exhausted. We knew she had no legal basis to claim Emma, but the simple fact that she was trying to re-enter our lives in that way was terrifying. That night, after putting the children to bed, my husband and I sat down to talk about what had happened. We decided that although we were prepared to fight for Emma, it was also important to protect her from all this chaos. We were not going to allow someone who had abandoned her to shake her world again. After that first confrontation with my sister-in-law, we thought that things would calm down. But we were completely wrong. In the following days, messages began to arrive from family members, all with the same tone. How can you do this to her? Emma deserves to be with her real mother, or you have no right to separate a mother from her daughter. It was evident that my sister-in-law had begun a campaign to paint herself as the victim. In her narrative, we were the cruel villains who had stolen her daughter while she struggled to move forward. It didn't matter that she had never tried to contact us for years or that we were the ones who had assumed all the responsibility from the beginning. Even my mother-in-law, who had originally supported the idea of us raising Emma, began to change sides. She started calling us constantly, asking us to reconsider. She has changed, she told us. She has become a mature woman and is ready to be a mother. She wasn't ready for 5 years. I replied again and again. Emma is not an accessory that she can pick up when she wants. The situation began to affect our daily routine. Every time we went out with the children, we felt like we were being watched. One afternoon while we were at the park, I noticed a car parked nearby that looked familiar. I watched it for more than half an hour until it finally started the engine and left. I couldn't prove it, but I was almost certain it was my sister-in-law. That night, we decided to talk to our lawyer again. We explained to him what was happening, and he recommended that we start considering a restraining order. He explained that although she legally had no rights over Emma, that wouldn't stop her from trying to cause problems or even from taking desperate measures. It was an emotional blow for us. We never wanted things to get to this point. But after that meeting with our lawyer, we knew that we had to prepare for the worst. A few days later, our intuition was confirmed. One afternoon while I was at home preparing dinner, someone started banging on the door forcefully. Looking through the peephole, I saw my sister-in-law again, this time alone and clearly upset. I had no intention of opening, but her persistence made me hesitate for a moment. I know you're there, she shouted. I just want to talk. I replied from inside, trying to stay calm. I have nothing more to say to you. Please leave. You can't do this, she insisted. I am her mother. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my husband. He was on his way home. But while he arrived, he told me to call the police if she didn't leave. In the end, I had to do it. When the officers arrived, they tried to reason with her, but she kept insisting that she had the right to see her daughter. Finally, they had to escort her off the property. It was humiliating and exhausting, but it also made it clear to us that the situation was escalating dangerously. That night, after the children were asleep, my husband and I sat in the living room. exhausted. We knew that this wouldn't be the last incident, and that terrified us. What would happen if Emma started to realize all of this? She had already asked a couple of times why her grandmother called so much. And although we tried to keep the answers vague, we knew that we wouldn't be able to protect her from the truth forever. What hurt the most was that during all this time, my sister-in-law didn't seem really interested in Emma as a person. She saw her as an opportunity to complete the image of the perfect family she was trying to build with her new fiancé. Her behavior showed no real remorse, just a sense of entitlement. Days after the incident, my sister-in-law posted on her social media. She shared a long post about how she had lost her daughter due to difficult decisions she had had to make in her youth. According to her, she was now fighting to rebuild her relationship with Emma. But selfish people were preventing her from fulfilling her dream of being a mother again. The post quickly accumulated supportive comments from people who clearly didn't know the whole story. My husband and I began to receive hateful messages on our own social media accounts. The pressure was increasing, and we realized that it was time to take more serious measures to protect not only Emma but also our peace of mind. We decided to proceed with the restraining order and look for ways to limit Emma's exposure to this drama. But the tension only increased when my sister-in-law made a desperate decision that put everything in danger. The breaking point came a week after the incident with the police. My sister-in-law was not only intensifying her harassment of us, but she had begun to involve other family members and friends in her crusade. We were facing daily messages, some insulting and others pleading. It seemed that everyone had an opinion on how we should handle the situation, although none of them had been there to raise Emma during the last 5 years. But the worst happened one Thursday afternoon. We had finished dinner, and the children were watching their favorite show in the living room while my husband and I were washing dishes. I ran to the living room, my heart pounding, and saw my sister-in-law in the backyard, trying to enter through a broken window. Emma, who was sitting on the sofa, cowered in fear while her brother hugged her, clearly confused and scared. My husband reacted immediately. He ran towards the back door, making sure to keep it closed, and yelled at her to leave. "I just want my daughter," she shouted from the other side, with a desperation that bordered on the irrational. I called the police while trying to calm the children. I assured them that everything would be fine, although inside, I was terrified of how far she was willing to go. When the officers arrived, she resisted, insisting that she had the right to see Emma because she was her biological daughter. But the legal papers didn't lie. After an intense discussion, they handcuffed her and took her away. It was a spectacle that none of us wanted, especially for the children, who were now fully aware that something was terribly wrong. That night, while we were putting them to bed, Emma looked at me with tearful eyes and asked, "Why does that lady say she is my mom? You are my mom, right?" My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I hugged her tightly and told her, "Of course I am your mom. I will always be. Nothing and no one will ever change that." After the children finally fell asleep, my husband and I sat in the living room, exhausted. We knew that we couldn't continue like this. The situation had escalated to a level we never imagined. The next day, we officially filed the restraining order, and we decided that it was time to take more drastic measures. Our lawyer helped us file a lawsuit for harassment and property damage to make it clear that we were not going to tolerate this behavior any longer. Although the legal process was stressful, it eventually worked. My sister-in-law was forced to undergo mandatory therapy and complete community service hours. In addition, the restraining order kept her more than 500 feet away from our house, our workplaces, and the children's schools. The following months were a slow process of rebuilding. Emma had many questions, and although we tried to explain things to her in a way that was appropriate for her age, we knew that certain truths would have to wait until she was older. On the other hand, my sister-in-law disappeared from our lives again. This time permanently, or at least that's what we hoped. We heard rumors that she had returned to Los Angeles and was trying to rebuild her life. But for us, It was a closed chapter. The most difficult thing was dealing with the comments from some family members who still believed that we were being unfair by not giving her a second chance. However, most of the people close to us understood that we had acted in Emma's best interest. Today, looking back, I realize that it was one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life, but also one that reaffirmed how important it is to fight for those you love. Emma is and always will be our daughter. We have done everything possible to protect her and ensure that she grows up in an environment full of love, security, and stability. And although I never imagined that we would have to go through something so extreme, in the end, it was all worth it.